First of all, I just wanted to ask you about something that just came out of that media conference with Anastasia Palaszczuk, talking about 2 quarantine facilities that are now needed in Queensland, and she wants to get rid of hotel quarantine altogether. What do you think of that idea? Couldn't these hotel facilities at least be used for vaccinated Australians coming home?
Laura, good to be with you. And yes, here we are in Sydney's lockdown, which is really Mr. Morrison's lockdown, because we've had a real failure this year to roll out the vaccine and to build fit-for-purpose national quarantine. Now, when it comes to hotel quarantine, we know that it can't contain the virus. It's a leaky system. We've had 26 leaks from hotel quarantine, and it really does point to why we need fit-for-purpose national quarantine. I mean, I've said this before. If you want to bring a horse into Australia, it's going to go into a safe, nationally run quarantine system. If a person comes into Australia, they're going to go into a leaky hotel that can't contain the virus. Now, when it comes to people returning overseas, and particularly for those who are unvaccinated, but Laura, we also know that this Delta strain is more contagious. We know that people who are vaccinated can still carry the virus and transmit it to others. The reality is hotel quarantine is proving not to be fit for purpose, which is why we need a rapid and quick expansion of a national fit for purpose system. And I'll just say this, I am pleased to see the Queensland government working with the federal government on the facility that's been proposed for Brisbane Airport. I would be really pleased to see Mr. Morrison and his government work again with Queensland on that facility that's proposed at Wellcome Airport at Toowoomba. And later on today, our leader, Anthony Albanese, will be in Toowoomba to highlight the need for a faster expansion of fit-for-purpose national quarantine.
Yeah, fit-for-purpose quarantine is one thing, and yes, you've demonstrated the need for that because of the Delta strain, but abolishing hotel quarantine altogether in Queensland, of which I think they're only going to be taking about 300 people a week. If they are vaccinated Australians, wouldn't you keep that in place so you could get more of these stranded Aussies home?
You know, Laura, we should have been picking up all the suggestions that you're making here that were also made in Jane Halton's report last year. Scott Morrison commissioned his own handpicked expert, Ms. Jane Halton, to do this review of hotel quarantine. And she said we need all options on the table. She said then that we should be looking at things like home quarantine, and particularly for people who've been vaccinated. She said that hotel quarantine was not fit for purpose in the long run for this virus. And she urged the Commonwealth then to put a range of options on the table, including expanding national quarantine facilities to bring the stranded Australians home before the Northern Hemisphere winter. Those were Jane Halton's words, and Mr. Morrison completely ignored that report. He claims, wrongly, it's just BS when he says it in Parliament, that they implemented it. They did not. They did not. Now, again, you know, we hear from Mr. Morrison last week that they're looking at home quarantine for fully vaccinated travellers, but we know that the Department of Health has admitted that nobody is actually collecting data about the vaccination of the people who are travelling to Australia. And so, again, we have a Prime Minister who loves an announcement, but is so light on the detail and is never there for the follow-through.
Okay, listening to that argument there, you're not the only one to have made it, absolutely, but you've also been campaigning very strongly to get Aussies home. And we heard from Gladys Berejiklian that she's so disappointed that these flight numbers are being capped. She says hotel quarantine is working well, and it's states like Anastasia Palaszczuk in Queensland, Dan Andrews in Victoria that have cut these caps. Are you disappointed that they've done that?
What I'm disappointed by is that we haven't had what Jane Halton recommended last year, an expansion of fit-for-purpose hotel of quarantine, not hotels, but national set-up quarantine that's there to contain the virus to get the stranded Aussies home. Let's not forget, Laura, that is what Jane Halton recommended. The Prime Minister promised he'd have all these stranded Aussies home by Christmas. He did not. The fact that people are stranded overseas sits squarely on Scott Morrison's head. And the fact that we don't have enough quarantine facilities sits squarely on this Commonwealth government, who is responsible for quarantine under the Constitution. And by the way, it's fine to point to outbreaks in Queensland and Victoria, but as we said at the top of this interview, Laura, you and I are both here in Sydney as a result of outbreaks of coronavirus from hotel quarantine that has led to community transmission in the double digits here in Sydney and across parts of New South Wales as we speak. I mean, we heard from Mr. Morrison this week there was supposedly a 4-stage plan. It's not a plan. It's a plan to have a plan. But secondly, under that plan, lockdown is supposed to be the option of last resort. For millions of Australians today, we know the only option on the table is lockdown. And that is because Mr. Morrison has not secured enough vaccine supply and has not built enough fit-for-purpose national quarantine facilities.
Some epidemiologists say lockdown isn't the only option at this point. But yes, I get to the broader point that you're making. If I could just ask you one final question. We're told July would be a huge ramp up in Pfizer. Well, week 1 of July, we're only getting 300,000. It will go to 500,000 next week and then 1 million in the third week and the fourth week alone. Can you understand why those can't be brought forward? I mean, we're bought into the COVAX facility. Should the government perhaps be leading on the Biden administration to send us some in their cohort more quickly so we can get this done?
Laura, maybe you should be in charge of the vaccine rollout. These are ideas that perhaps should be coming from the federal health minister, be coming from the prime minister. They promised us 4 million Australians vaccinated by the end of March. Didn't happen. They promised us that all aged care workers vaccinated by Easter. Didn't happen. We've got an outbreak right now in Balcombe Hills here in Sydney in an aged care facility due to unvaccinated staff. 2/3 of the staff there are unvaccinated. We've now got 5 residents who've got COVID. They promised us that we would have all Australians vaccinated who wanted to be by the end of October. That is not going to happen, and that is because we do not have enough supply. Understand this. All the promises about GPs getting vaccine in July, that's great. But unless we have supply, it just doesn't matter. And so that sits again with Mr. Morrison, who didn't do enough deals last year, didn't get 5 or 6 deals, which is world's best practice, put all his eggs in the AstraZeneca basket. Now we are in a circumstance where we in Australia don't have the herd immunity, thank goodness. We don't have the natural immunity, I should say, thank goodness, because we were able to contain the virus, but countries like the UK and the US do. And they've had an effective rollout of the vaccine. So for us, my point is the vaccine rollout is so much more important than it is anywhere else because we don't have that natural immunity in the community. And that's why it's just so frustrating that people who want to get vaccinated simply can't get enough. Their doctors don't have enough supply. They can't get appointments at these max vaccination hubs. And people just simply can't get vaccinated. And they've got to be, I know they're frustrated. I hear them calling out my office and MPs do around the country. And until that's fixed, until Mr. Morrison figures out how to fix his bungled vaccine rollout, we're going to be stuck in this problem of there's demand but not enough supply.
Okay, Kristina Keneally, thanks so much for your time.